What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be working with Flutter. So we're coming in at day 20 of hashtag 30 days of Flutter, and in this video we're going to be working with authentication. Now we're going to be using AWS Amplify and its hosted web sign-in so that we can get up and running with authentication in our app with just a few easy steps. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump right on in. So if we take a look at what's going on so far, we just have our To-Do app, which we created in the past couple of videos, and nothing has changed since then. Now, what we want to do is we want to go back and replace our auth model. So we set it up so that we can just get the API part working, but now what we want to do is we actually want to update it. So if you're just getting started with auth, then you can do Amplify add auth, and it's going to take you down a similar path as this. But since we already have auth implemented into our project, we don't need to do that. So let me just do a quick Amplify status so that you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so as you can see here, I already have the API and auth categories added. If you don't have those categories added, just simply do Amplify add API. You can pretty much select all the default arguments for that one. And then for Amplify add auth, you can pretty much follow along from this point forward. So we're going to just go ahead and clear this out, make it all nice and clean, and then we're going to do Amplify add auth, or update auth. Update, because we're updating it, right? So what we want to do is we want to select the social provider, right? Default configuration with social provider. If you're just getting started with auth, you would do Amplify add auth, and then you would select the one that's default configuration with social provider. So we're just going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to ask us for a prefix on the name. I don't think that we could use this prefix because it has underscores, but if we just go through and remove those underscores like so, you could just do this and this, or you could give it a completely new name. It's all up to you. But if you remove those underscores, it should be fine. Then we need a URI. So the URI is going to be a way that the hosted web UI can connect back into the actual app. It will know which app to open up. In this case, it's going to be our app, and we'll just call this To-Do app. All right, so as you can see, we're going to call it To-Do app, but it's suffixed with : / That's what makes it a URI. Go ahead and copy that because we're going to need it again in a second. We're going to hit enter. Do we want to add any more redirect URIs? Nope. So then we paste it in again for the redirect on the sign out. Right? We did the sign in, now we need the sign out. Paste the same thing, and we're going to hit nope. Then we're going to go ahead and hit enter again because we're not going to use an actual social provider, and we're pretty much all set. So now what we'll do is we'll do Amplify push like so. And we're going to get a status breakdown of our current app. I just had to select AWS profile for whatever reason, but as you can see, we have our auth category being updated right here. So auth is now being updated. If you're creating it, then it's going to say create. But do we want to continue? We're going to say yes, sir. And then we're just going to, continue to press enter until it actually kicks off the thing and goes out there and updates our resource. So this will take about 5 to 10 minutes to finish, and then we'll get back into it. All right, and there it goes. It's all done. Now, as you can see, I went outside in the meantime and it was hailing. So we got a little bit of hail right there. I don't know if y'all can see that. I probably can't. It's okay. Anyways, now that we're all done with that, let's go back over to our app and take a look at some of the things that we set up in the last video that are essential to make this work, right? So we have configure amplify function, which is called inside of our main.dart file. And we have this plugin being added. So absolutely need that auth plugin. And then we're simply calling the configure amplify as soon as the state for our app is created. We also have in the pubspec.yaml over here, you can see that we also have all of our dependencies already installed from the last video. Data store API. This is the most important one for this video. Auth cognito, right? We need that. And then lastly, because between now and the last video, Flutter 2.0 has actually came out. What you need to do if you're working with data store and API specifically, you need to make sure that in your pod file under iOS and pod file that you add this. So you can find this in the documentation. I'll leave a link to the documentation below where you can find this snippet, but make sure that this is added to your pod file. All that's done. We're pretty much ready to go. Next, what we want to do is we actually want to go back to our lib folder and create the auth repository, which is going to be responsible for interacting with AWS Amplify and the auth function. So let's go ahead and create that new file now. All right, so as you can see, we have our new auth repository class right here, and there's three different functions that we want to implement here. We want to implement the sign in, the sign out, and then we also want to attempt to auto sign in, right? So we want to also like make sure that the user's still authenticated when they go in, so only they can see their to-dos, right? So let's go ahead and start off with the first function, which is going to be the sign in, and it's only a couple of lines of code, so let's go ahead and add that. All right, so as you can see, we have this function now called web sign in. It's going to be responsible for returning a future string, right? Because async right there, right? And then all we need to do in order to trigger this web sign in, sorry about the rain in the background, can't do much about it. God said, let there be rain, and so there was, right? Anyways, what we have is this sign in with web UI, which is going to trigger the sheet to pop up in our app. And then after that, we're going to get this result. So if you hover over the result, you should see that it is a sign-in result. Went away, but it's a sign-in result. And the sign-in result's going to give us the information about whether we were actually signed in or signed out. So let's go ahead and add in some logic based off of whether we are signed in or signed out. All right, so simple enough. We're going to check if we are signed in based off of what the result gives us. And what we want to do is we actually want to get the user ID. Now, if we didn't sign in, like if they weren't able to sign up, or if they like entered in the wrong password or something like that, and they didn't handle that in the web UI, then we're just simply going to throw an exception right here. We're not going to do anything too advanced in regards to error handling. Now, to make this a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break out the functionality for getting a user ID into a separate function called fetch, it's going to be fetch user ID from attributes, and that will get our user ID out of the provided attributes as long as the user is signed in. So let's create that function now. All right, so there we go. We have fetch user ID from attributes. This is a function that's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to return a future string, which is going to be the user ID. And we get those user attributes by simply doing await amplify.auth.fetch user attributes. Straightforward if you ask me. And then what we want to do is we want to get the sub attribute. So the sub we can kind of use as an ID for that user. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over all the attributes, and then we're going to get the first element where the element has a user attribute key that's equal to sub, and we're just going to simply access the value of that sub attribute, and that's going to be our user ID. So we'll return that right there, and now we can use that function right here inside of our web sign in and return that function. So return await fetch user ID attribute ID from attributes. So now we have our web sign in all set up and it's ready to go, because we're going to be able to get the user ID once the user has signed in, right? Now we also need to account for signing out and also the auto sign in. We're going to start with the signing out because it's extremely simple and straightforward. So let's go ahead and add in that functionality too. So as you can see here in our sign out function, it's just going to return a future void because once again, async. And in our try block, we're going to just simply run await amplify auth sign out. Easy as that. And then for the sign in, we're actually going to take advantage of the fetch user ID attribute or from attributes function, and we're simply going to return that. The reason why we're doing it that way is because we should only be able to fetch those attributes if the user is signed in. And if we get some type of error or we get some type of exception or something like that, then we know that the user is signed out. So let's go ahead and add that functionality in there too. All right, so as simple as that, just another good 4 or 5 lines of code and we are all set, because we're just getting those the user ID from the attributes. Simple as that. Now that we have our auth repository all set up, let's go ahead and create our auth Cubit that's going to actually allow us to interact with this functionality. So here we go. We got our auth Cubit object, which is going to extend Cubit, and it's going to be a generic, which takes in an auth state. We don't have that auth state. Let's go ahead and add a new file where we can add in the different auth states as well. All right, so we have our auth state being the abstract class here. And what we want to do is we want to have 3 different states. So there's the case where we just don't know what the state is. Maybe we haven't been able to find out if we're signed in or signed out yet. So you can either consider that to be the initial or the unknown state. I'm going to call it unknown. Then we have the authenticated, which should include the user ID, or the unauthenticated, which is just going to be just another empty class. So let's go ahead and add in those 3 different states now. All right, there we go. So our unknown state, our authenticated state, which is going to carry our user ID for us, and then our unauthenticated state. So let's go back. Well, first let's save it, right? Let's go back over to our auth Cubit, make sure that we import this bad boy right here. And now we should be set and ready to go, with the exception of right here. So we need to update this to be unknown auth state at the get-go, right? Now we need to also include our auth repository, and then functions that will allow us to interact with the 3 different functions that we actually included in our auth repository, which are sign in, sign out, and attempt auto sign in. So let's go ahead and add an instance of our auth repo, and then the functions that go alongside those. All right, so we have our 3 different functions that will be able to interact with the auth repo as well. So let's go ahead and add in this functionality. Everything's going to be wrapped by a try-catch block, which is going to allow us to determine which state we should be emitting from our Cubit. So for our sign-in function, we're going to simply access the user ID from the authrepo.webSignin. We're going to check to make sure that it's not null and that it's not empty. As long as it's a valid user ID, then we can emit the authenticated state, which is also going to carry that user ID. Else, we're going to just set, we're going to emit the unauthenticated state for, if there's something wrong with the user ID, or if we just couldn't, do the web sign in, like if we threw that exception, right? We're going to do something, we're going to now implement the same thing for sign out. All right, for sign out, it's even more straightforward, right? We just call auth repo sign out, and we actually want to await on this actually, but we do sign out, and then if we get some type of exception, we're just going to emit that. So we can do the same thing right here in the sign in, where we're just doing on exception. We're not going to actually be doing anything with the exception that's passed to us, but just on any exception, we'll just simply emit the unauthenticated. And then the attempt auto sign in is going to be very similar to the actual sign in. So we're going to once again try to get that that user ID. And if we can't get the user ID from the attempt auto sign in, then we'll just simply emit unauthenticated. All right, so we have our attempt auto sign in right here, async, you know it. We get our user ID. If it's a valid user ID, we emit that authenticated state, but if not, like if there's a problem or it's just empty or something like that, unauthenticated in any other use case, right? So that's attempt auto sign in. From here, what we want to do is we want to go back over to our main dot. Well, first we got to save it, right? We got to save it. Then we need to go to main.dart, and we want to update our build method, because now the block provider that we're more interested in providing at this top level is actually going to be the auth Cubit, and then we're going to implement the to-do Cubit at a lower level when we go through navigation. So let's go ahead and update this block provider. So now you can see that we are updating our block provider with this auth Cubit, right? And we actually need to work with, the to-dos Cubit as well. We could have done the multi-block provider thing, but it's actually better to kind of scope down your Cubits and only provide them to the views that are actually in need of them. So we're going to do that at a lower level. Now, if you take a look at what's going on here, once again, we're checking to see if Amplify is configured or not before we show anything, and we're running that configure Amplify right here, and then that's when we're updating that state, right? So depending on what Amplify configured is, which it's starting off as false, depending on what's going on right here is going to determine what we're showing. So if Amplify is not configured, or if Amplify is configured, then we're going to show the to-dos view, which isn't necessarily what we want to do. We want to show them an auth view. And then if it is not configured, then we'll show the loading view in the meantime. What we want to do is show an auth view, and we actually want to manage that with an App Navigator, right? So let's go ahead and create the auth view first so that we can get some type of UI showing, and then we'll go back and add it into an App Navigator. So we'll start off with a new file and we'll call it auth view. All right, so we have our very simple auth view set right here, and it's just a stateless widget. Now, since we are going to be doing authentication through the web UI, all we really need to do is trigger that function from our auth repository, which is the web sign-in, to actually kick off. And we do that by accessing our auth Cubit, right? So what we really need is just a button that says sign in, and it's going to kick off that entire flow for us. So let's go ahead and add an elevated button that's going to access the auth Cubit and trigger that sign in functionality. And there we go. So as you can see, we have the center, we have the elevated button, which is just going to say sign in, and we're going to be able to kick off that sign in functionality using our block provider of the auth Cubit, which we did up at the main level. There we go. So now what we want to do is we want to actually create the App Navigator, which is going to be responsible for observing the auth Cubit's state and displaying different screens depending on that state. So let's go ahead and create another file. So here's our App Navigator, which is a stateless widget. And right now it's only building out this blank navigator. Now what we want to do is we want to observe that auth Cubit, right? So we're going to need to work with a block builder and make sure that it's specified for the auth Cubit. And then we can go into our navigator and work with the pages and show the specific pages based off of the state. And there we go. So now we have our navigator wrapped in our block builder. We're passing in an auth Cubit and auth state, which means that this is going to be an auth state. We'll check that state to see if it's of type unauthenticated. If it is, then we're going to show our auth view. If the user is authenticated, then we will show the to-dos view. And then if we don't know the state, like if we're just launching the app, then we can just simply show a loading view, just that circular spinner. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're still providing the to-do Cubit. Remember, we removed it from the main.dart file, and now we need to make sure that we're adding it back in. And we can add it back in at this level if we choose to, which I am going to do for this tutorial. So we're actually going to wrap our to-dos view in a block provider for our to-dos Cubit. And there we go. So now we have our material page that was returning the to-dos view wrapped in a block provider so that we can provide our to-dos Cubit to this to-dos view, and it can access all the different functionality that it was doing before in the block builder there. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually update our to-do object, because right now, if we take a look at the Cubit and we take a look at the to-do repository, when we're doing the query, where is it, get to-dos, right? When we're doing a query on our to-do or from data store, we're just getting back all the to-dos that there are, right? And we want to specialize this query to be only getting back to-dos with a specific user ID, right? That's the entire reason why we signed in, so that the user can only see the to-dos that are associated with their account. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our terminal and we're going to run Amplify console. So we run Amplify console and it's going to give us a couple of different options to work with. So the one that we want to specify is the admin UI. So I'm going to hit enter and it's going to open up the browser. All right, so once you're all signed in to AWS and you have the admin UI opened up, we're going to head over to our data schema. And what we want to do is we want to update our to-do model. So we're going to add in a new field called user ID. So now we have user ID and it's going to be of type string. Now there is a different way that you can go about doing this. You could have created a whole nother model called user like this. And you could have also created a relationship between the to-dos and the user. And you would do that just like this. So you would select to-do and you would say that this is to-dos, and then it's going to be a one-to-many relationship, right? Because there's one user can have many to-dos, and you could do something like this, and it would update your field accordingly. But since we're keeping it very simple and we're actually not going to be working with a user model or doing anything fancy, right? Then it makes sense to just make our user ID just an additional property on our to-do model. So just make sure that it's required and you're all set and ready to go. So once you're done making those updates, you hit save and deploy, and it's going to check to make sure that everything is up to date, and it's going to deploy, and that's going to take another 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so there we go. We have deployed successfully, looking real snazzy like that. And now over back in our terminal, what we'll do is we'll do amplify pull so that we can get the latest version of our backend. And we will fetch the updates from the admin UI, and we're gonna make sure that we're all logged in and authenticated. We're gonna go back over here, and we should be able to see that we were able to successfully update our Amplify project locally. So that's looking pretty good. We can throw away our terminal now. And as you'll notice, we're running into some problems here. We have the yellow underline squiggly thing going on right here, specifying that our to-do is not being created properly. And the reason for that is because our models have been updated, or I should say model, right? Our model has been updated to include this user ID right here. And it's also a required property on the factory constructor, which is what we're using back over there at our to-do Cubit, or our to-do, our to-do repository, I'm sorry. So to-do now needs to take in a user ID. So how are we going to get the user ID into the to-do repository? Well, what we can do is we can go back over to the to-do Cubit, and we can make it so that when we initialize a to-do Cubit, it requires the user ID to be passed in. So let's go ahead and make that change now. So now our constructor for the to-do Cubit is going to take in the user ID, which we're going to access right here. And now we know that we can pass that ID, that user ID, to our to-do repository in the function. So anytime we have a function, we can just simply pass in, or anytime we do a get to-dos, we can simply pass in the specific user ID. So when we do it right here, we'll add the user ID argument. Same thing with creating and updating the to-do. Well, actually not updating, but just creating to-do. We also need to add that to the constructor right here when we're creating a new to-do. So let's add those in right now. All right, so 2 changes really. We are now passing the user ID into our get to dos function right here. And you can see that when we are doing our query, everything stays the same except for this new argument, which is the where argument. So we specify the type of object that we want to query, which is to do, right? Then we access the specific property that we're going to do the query by. In this case, we're interested in the user ID, and we're saying the user ID of the to do is equal to whatever we're passing in right here for the user ID. So this is how we do our predicates with Amplify. Now that means all the to-dos that we get back are going to have the same user ID, And the way that we're going to make sure that it has that user ID is in the create to do function, right? So whenever we create a to do, we now need to pass in a title and the user ID. And when we create that new to do, we're gonna pass in the user ID right there. So then we'll be able to like create new to dos with that user ID as well. So now that we have this updated, that means that we need to go back to our to-do Cubit and update the calls to the get to-dos as well as the create to-do. All right, and there we go. So get to-dos is now passing in the user ID, and same thing with the create to-do. It is passing in the user ID. And the awesome thing about doing it this way is that we actually didn't have to modify or pass the user ID down to our to-do view. So the to-dos view stayed all the same. We didn't even have to update it, but all the functionality around it has changed in regards to like the to-do repository, the to-do Cubit, and then back over here at our App Navigator, we need to just make sure that we're passing in the user ID to our to-do Cubit right here. So let's add that too. All right, and as simple as that, we're now passing in the user ID from the state, because remember, authenticated holds on to that user ID for us, and we just simply pass it in to our to-do. So that's all we really needed to do. That's all we really had to, get updated in order for this process to work. The only thing that we're missing at this point is attempting to auto sign in. So attempting to auto sign in is on our auth Cubit, which means that we're going to do that back over here in our main.dart. And right here, when we're doing our block provider for our auth Cubit, we just do our sexy cascade and we're all good to go. There we go. So cascade attempt auto sign in when on our auth Cubit that's being provided to this block provider. And we need to also update our child to display the App Navigator as well, right? So we don't want to just simply show the to-do view, right? We want to show the App Navigator, which is responsible for all that jazz. So now I think that we're pretty much all done. All we need to do is, oh, and I ran into a crash right here because we were running in the background and all kinds of stuff has changed. But all we need to do now is simply just go back to our main.dart and we can just simply run the app and everything should work as expected. Oh, before we actually run the app, let's go ahead and stop that. I forgot that, remember when we were setting up Auth that we needed to add in the different URIs. So we need to add that to both iOS and Android. So for iOS, all you need to do is you need to go into iOS and go over to the runner and open up the info.plist, and down here all the way at the bottom. All right, so we just added in this little snippet right here, which you can see is going to handle the different URL types. And we are passing in for our bundle URL schemas this to-do app. So whatever you put into the CLI when you were doing the URIs, which we did to-do app : and that's the value right here, you'll also want to put that same exact thing right here. So that's how you do it on iOS. And then for Android, you do something very similar where you open up the Android folder, you go to app, source, main, and I think it's the Android manifest. And we need to add in this snippet at the end of the first activity. And there you go. So we have another activity pasted in, and it's going to be this activity. Like I said, I'll leave the link to these document snippets in the description down below, but just make sure that the scheme is exactly the same way that you spelled it when you entered it into the CLI. So make sure you save that, you save the info.plist as well, and then you can finally run the app and everything should work as expected. All right, so we're running into a problem right here, and the reason for that is because we received essentially null, that we didn't get anything back because the user's not signed in. So let's just go ahead and wrap this entire thing in a catch block, and this is back over here in the auth repository. So we're gonna wrap everything in a try catch block, and then let's see if we can get everything else working. All right, so here we go. So now we wrapped it in a try catch for the fetch user ID from attributes. And one additional thing that I'm gonna also do is over here in our attempt auto sign in, what we're gonna do is we're also going to make sure that we are signed in. So as long as we're signed in, then we should be able to fetch these user ID attributes or from the attributes. So we'll just do that check just to be extra safe. All right, so as you can see, I updated our attempt auto sign in to now get the current auth session. And once we have that auth session, we'll be able to find out, are we signed in or not? And then only if we are signed in will we fetch the user ID from the attributes. If not, then we'll just throw an exception saying that we're not signed in. And then we already have logic that's going to check to make sure that the ID, the user ID that's expected to be returned is valid, or else it's just going to show the unauthenticated view. So now let's go ahead and run that and let's see if it works. All right, and there we go. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it had a little bit of a circular motion going for it. And now what we want to do is we want to hit this button, and it should bring up our sign-in view. Well, first it's going to ask us if we have permission to do this, but yeah, we're going to hit continue. It's going to bring up our sign-in view, and we don't have an account with this app yet, so we need to sign up. So let me go ahead and enter in some information. All right, so we have our user information right here. I'm just going to hit sign up, and now I get a verification code sent to my email. All right, so now we entered in our verification code. I'm going to confirm the account and it should sign me in. And as you can see, it is getting the authentication being updated. Now we're stuck at this this login view because we're never actually doing the query to update our state. So if we take a look at our to-do Cubit, you know, we're going to start off in this loading to-dos state, right? But what we actually want to do is we want to get to-dos as soon as the user has actually signed in. So we can actually do that in our App Navigator. Whenever we show this page, we can access our to-do Cubit and simply do get to-dos, like so. So we'll update that, and then if we stop it and we restart it, this will allow us to check if we are not only getting the to-dos, but also if we're able to auto sign in. Since we've already signed in once, we should automatically be able to sign in and see the to-dos screen right off the bat. All right, and we got an error. So this is essentially saying that we have some problems because we have data in our data store that is not consistent with the data that we're expecting to interact with from our backend. So the reason for this is because we had a to-do in there that didn't have a user ID, and since that's a required field, we need to make sure that we get rid of that to-do. So what I'm going to do is just a quick little hack, and I'll just go back over here to I'll go over to our main.dart file, and once we are finished configuring, I will actually comment out this state so that we're not changing state, but I'll just add in a little hack that will help me get this local data store cleared. Now I could just delete the app and that should do it, but just so that you know, the programmatic way to do this is you just simply pass in amplify data store.clear, and that will clear out your local data store, and it should resolve this issue. So I'm going to run this one more time. All right, so now the app has loaded and we have configured Amplify because we can see this loading view right here. So now that means that this code should have ran. So I'm just going to comment it out so that you can just, you know, reference it and you can, you know, remember, hey, Kilo ran into this problem. This is how we fix it. So now that I have it cleared out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the app one last time, and then that should have actually cleared out data store from all the data that was inconsistent with what we're expecting for our new backend, and we should see our empty to-dos view from now on. All right, and here we go. So now we are opening up the app and it loads and we see no to-dos yet. So we were able to resolve that issue where we had data that was like inconsistent with the new database, and we were able to resolve that with the Amplify data store clear. And now when I create a new to-do, all right, so as you can see, I'm going to call it to-do from iFro account because this is going to be specific to that. And it looks like it didn't update, so we might have a little bit of a bug back over here in our to-do Cubit. We just want to make sure that we are observing the to-dos right after, right when we start. So that's also another function that's not being called, which we can add to our App Navigator right here, and we're going to do another sexy cascade where we're observing the to-dos like so. So now, once again, I'm just going to run it again. So as you can see, I ran into a couple of problems, and you know, you go through some of these problems when you're like modifying things with your backend and stuff like that. But I wanted to keep like these mistakes inside the video just so that you can be aware of things when they pop up and kind of have an idea of how to resolve them. So one thing that you should have noticed is that whenever we open up our app, it is opening up to the to-do screen as opposed to going back to the sign-in screen, right? Because we're already authenticated and we're able to get that information back. So now you can see that we got the to-do from iFro account, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is still updating. So we're observing the to-dos, and we'll say, are you listening? And we'll see if it updates, and you can see that it is updating with that information. Now the important thing that we want to do is we want to actually log out. So right here in our to-dos view, I'm going to add a log out button, which we can call once again from our Auth Cubit. So over here in to-dos view under scaffold and app bar, we're going to go down to nav bar. We're going to add a leading button, which is going to be our sign out button. All right, so as you can see, we updated our nav bar to now have a leading icon of icon button, which is just going to show this log out icon, and it's going to access our Auth Cubit and call sign out from our Auth Cubit. So let's go ahead and open up our app again, and as you can see, we have the sign out button right here, and when I hit it, we should be able to show the screen that is going to tell our app to sign out, and we actually didn't get back the information to sign the user out and update the state. So what we want to do is we want to go over to our Auth Cubit, make sure that it is updating, and as you can see here, I'm calling sign out, but I'm never emitting the unauthenticated state. So what we should probably do is we should probably just put emit out here outside of this catch block, but you know, we could put it either way, unauthenticated, right? So you catching all my bugs. Look at how many bugs there are when I'm doing this, and you thought I was prepared? Oh boy, no, I was not. So when we stop the app, we should see that we are signed out, and when we sign back, or when we launch the app, we should see that we are signed out because it did call the sign out functionality. So we will no longer be signed in. So when it tries to do the auto sign in, there's not going to be a session available, right? So we should be unauthenticated. And what we're going to do is actually sign up as a different user, make sure that we can create a different to-do for our specific account, then sign out and then sign back into the iFro account. So as you can see, we are signed out. So let's go ahead and sign in. All right, so as you can see, I'm creating a new user on the sign up, and I'm going to have to also validate this email as well. All right, so I entered in my confirmation code or verification code. I confirm my account, and then we sign in and we don't see any to-dos. So we're off to a really good start that we're not seeing any to-dos. So let's go ahead and create a to-do specific to this account. All right, and we save this to-do. We see it pop up there, looking great. Let's go ahead and sign out. Let's see if our sign out functionality works. It does. We want to sign back in. So we're going to do continue. We're going to enter in the user iFro, which was our initial account. And we sign in, and there you go. So as you can see, there are to-dos only specific to this account, to-do from iFro account, and the Are You Listening to-do, which were both created on this account and not the to-do from the Kilo account. So that's going to be it for today. That's all I wanted to show you, was how to get up and running with authentication and adding it into your app. We did it the really easy way, where we were using the web auth to just get our entire sign-up flow, so we didn't have to worry about dealing with form validation or anything like that. We didn't have to set up like 3 or 4 different screens just to go through all the different processes of signing in and signing up and stuff like that. So using the web sign-in can be great if you're in a pinch and you want to get some type of functionality out the door. Now, in the upcoming videos, we're actually going to be building out our own authentication flow, and we're going to be working with forms and validation and things like that. So be on the lookout for that. If you want to watch more videos like this and the one that I just mentioned with real authentication with Flutter, then make sure you subscribe. So that's going to be it for today. I appreciate your time. Now go out there and keep coding passionately.